Cade,
Hey, Michelle.
which of these choice PDE sessions did you sign up for?
Oh, let's see. I'm either signed up for the one about properly tucking in your shirt while still not loosening your belt, or flu-proofing my classroom.
I'm signed up for how to sharpen pencils correctly for standardized tests.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Can we trade?
Either one is just an hour of our lives we'll never get back. Welcome to Across the Hall, a podcast sharing ELA strategies from one door away with your hosts, Cade Summers and Michelle Shelton. This is episode 11, PD Party. Hey y'all, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Cade.
In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the ever-dreaded professional development.
Wait, stop. Don't turn us off.
Don't turn us off. Just wait.
I know you heard professional development.
Right.
We have Rich Czyz, author of The 4 O'Clock Faculty, a rogue guide to revolutionizing professional development. And Rich is going to be explaining how PD can actually be fun and worth your time.
And Cade is the one who titled this episode. He's very proud of himself. Why did you choose PD Party, Cade?
I don't know. I have big brothers who used to do painful things to me. And then they would make fun of me by saying, "You want a pity party?" Things like that. My brain and my emotions are scarred for life. But there's a double entendre here. On one hand, it's sad for a lot of us to actually walk into the cafeteria or some lab where we're going to participate in the dreaded professional development. But then on the other hand, it's also a PD party because we're going to change the way that you look at professional development, and we're going to use Rich Czyz to be able to do that for you.
Right. We've spent hours, over 18 years of teaching, how long I've been teaching. I've spent hours in professional development that meant absolutely nothing to me. But Rich is here to talk to us about how we can take control of our own professional development and make it fun.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome, Rich Czyz.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and can't wait to talk.
Hi, Rich. I've been reading your book. I think I tweeted the other day where I was reading it while eating sushi by myself, waiting on my daughter and her friends to finish. So I was just sitting there reading my 4 o'clock faculty book. I'm having me a good old time. We've been excited to talk to you. I know we've kind of tweeted back and forth trying to find a good time for this, and we're excited to have you here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I love talking about the book and talking about professional development. And I did see that you were reading it while eating sushi, so I don't think there's any better way to do that. So,
absolutely.
We actually found out about your book through our principal, Heath Harmon. He likes to participate in all these Twitter chats, and we also do as best we can as well. He was really proud one day that he participated in an Ohio chat, and that as a result of the Ohio chat, he got a text back and said he had won the Ohio chat. And I think that may be how we came into contact with you and found out about you, that he ended up, I believe, winning a book or getting a book as a result of the Twitter chat.
Yeah, normally when I do Twitter chats surrounding the book, I try to give away a copy, and I think he did win one for the Ohio Ed Chat.
I know, yeah. So we were proud of that because here in Alabama, to win against Ohio was that was a pride thing. It wasn't football related, but it kind of felt like it.
Well, I root for Michigan, so I'll stick with you on that as well.
All right, good. All right, so the title of your book, just starting there, it got my attention. I like 4 o'clock usually as a teacher. For me, it's after a long day of work, and depending upon the time of year, with basketball season and grading, I'm usually doing a number of different things, either personal or school related. So I know your reason for coming up with the title of the book has to do with a principal named Roy Briggs. Could you describe the story behind that a little bit?
Sure. So in my first teaching job, I came in contact with an art teacher named Trevor Bryan. And he and I kind of just hit it off from the moment that we met. And he would often tell stories about his father, who was also an educator. So he was an educator for 30 plus years. Made it all the way up to assistant superintendent, but had served as a principal, as a teacher, in any number of roles. And one of the stories that his father would tell, Larry Bryan, was about the first time that he was hired for his teaching position. It was in Connecticut, and Roy Briggs had the opportunity to hire a brand new staff. So he was opening a brand new high school, and his mission was to create the best high school in the state of Connecticut. And in doing that, he interviewed a lot of teachers. Larry Bryan was one of those people. And Larry made the mistake of asking during the interview, what time are we allowed to leave? And Roy Briggs simply answered, "We are a 4:00 faculty." They were allowed to leave at 2:15, but his simple answer was, "We are a 4:00 faculty." And I think that message of, dedicating yourself and making sure that you are doing whatever you need to be the best teacher that you can be, really kind of resonated with both Trevor and I. So when we were initially talking about names for our blog, which is also 4o'clockfaculty.com, that was kind of the one that resonated with both of us, and that's where the idea comes from. So then when I got ready to do the book, it really makes a lot of sense, right? It's for those teachers who are going above and beyond to continue to pursue their own professional learning.
So whenever you go to talk to people about professional development, I bet they are just rushing in the doors trying to hear about professional development. Am I right?
So it depends on how it's presented to them. And, I think that's what the book is all about, is really taking a look at professional development and, in the traditional way that it has been presented, because I think that's often when it's the last thing that people want to talk about, is when it's sit and get, you're pulling 400 people into a room and you're talking at them for an hour, and, they want to be in a million other places other than the professional development session. And the book is all about trying to get them out of that, trying to revolutionize professional development and really change what is possible with PD.
Right. I think sometimes our problem is this definition of professional development. Maybe we're not on the same page with somebody who thinks what they're doing is professional development, and the rest of us don't feel like we're being very developed. So how can we get on the same page with just defining what it is?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of terms that are thrown around. I know a lot of people will talk to me about professional learning versus professional development. But I also firmly believe that there's a big difference between professional development and training. And I think a lot of what we do in schools, which is couched as professional development, is a lot of times training. And there's a lot of things that teachers need to be trained on, whether it's a new curriculum or, a new program or a new technology tool. And sometimes that training has to, be in a certain format, and that's understandable. But I think in terms of professional development, as I'm talking about it, it's each educator taking responsibility for their own professional development and their own professional learning. There's a quote in the book about the one person that's in charge of professional development, and it's you. And I think that's the message, is trying to get everyone to take charge on their own.
One of the things you mentioned in your book is, from the administrational angle, the one of the biggest problems, the time that it takes to be able to plan out a really well-executed PD session. In our school, we have professional development every morning now in a new system that we have. Our first period at the high school for all of our content teachers, we have planned PD, but it took hiring 4 different innovation teachers to be able to plan each daily session. So I guess describe from your angle that hurdle and some of the things that you think are important when it comes to, professionals getting beyond that and the planning part no longer being such a problem.
Sure. So first I want to compliment your school, because the ability to have professional development sessions each morning is awesome. And that's really the first time that I've ever heard about that, is any school being able to do that. So simply amazing. And I hope that they are meaningful and relevant and in what you're learning. In terms of planning PD, and it really started when I had an early experience as an administrator. I took a job, and we had a professional development day scheduled for the Friday before President's Day weekend. So it was a few years ago. And on that day, I went looking for one of my colleagues and looked everywhere, asked several people where they were, couldn't find that person. And eventually I was told, oh, they took off today. And I said, well, what do you mean they took off today? Today's professional development day. Like, what do you mean they took off? And I was told, oh, well, they took off to make it a 4-day weekend. Like, a lot of people do that because the PD is so meaningless, right? And when you hear that sort of thing, first as an administrator, I was taken back, and I was like, are they even allowed to take off today? And number one, how are they getting the training that we're supposed to be giving them? But as I reflected more about it, I kind of realized that if the PD is not meaningful to what that person is doing, there's probably a good reason that they're taking off. And after that, shortly after that, I started to take over more of the professional development in that district. And I realized that we had a responsibility to the teachers to make sure they were getting something that they were going to want to show up for. And, in that district, it was about 350 instructional staff. And as one person, it was very difficult to plan, as you said. It's much easier to say all 350 people are going to show up. I'm going to put them in the cafeteria, and I'm going to have one speaker talk to them for 2 hours, because that's really simple, nice and easy, easy to schedule. I booked the cafeteria, I booked the speaker, and we're good to go. Trying to make that professional development meaningful to every person in that room can be rather difficult. One of the examples that I always talk about is our school nurse. We used to require our school nurse to come to our staff meetings at the end of the day. And that was always one of the toughest groups, is trying to figure out, okay, what type of professional development are we doing for our school nurses? So I think in terms of planning meaningful and relevant PD, it is about really thinking about everyone's needs. So it might mean starting with a survey, right? So asking teachers, what is it that you need, or what is it that you want in terms of your own professional learning? And then really taking that feedback and using it to guide your sessions. It does require a lot of times relying on the experts that you have within your building, as opposed to bringing experts, from outside of the district, because those people are there on a daily basis. If somebody has a question for them after the fact, they can always go back to them. So I think there's lots that you can do in order to make sure that it is meaningful for everyone. It does take a lot of legwork. It means listening to the teachers to find out exactly what it is that they want or need.
Well, listening to all of that and how complicated that can be, I can see why the majority of your book is about teachers taking control of their own learning, because then they are individualizing it themselves, right? We do leaders of their own learning with our students, but your book could be titled Leaders of Their Own Learning Teacher Edition, because that's a lot of what that is. So you have several really fun ideas for teachers to create professional learning communities within their school. So my first question for you there is, what is some advice that you might have for a teacher who wants to go rogue and wants to plan a professional development when it comes to actually approaching the principal about it, approaching administration to get approval? How might they do that?
So I always tell everyone, as a building principal, there's a lot of times where I have so much going on. We'll have a staff meeting tomorrow, for example. So I already know what's on my agenda for tomorrow. We have a couple of really unfortunate mandated state things that we have to do with our staff. So that's going to be on our agenda for tomorrow. But there are times when I will go into a staff meeting, which starts at 3:45, and as of 3:15, I'm writing the agenda at that moment. And simply because I'm busy doing a lot of other meaningful things that a principal should be doing. I think most principals might welcome someone who's willing to help out and say, hey, here's something that I want to try. And giving teachers the opportunity to do that. I think sometimes if you just offer and say, hey, here's what I've been working on in the class. I think this is an awesome app or tool that I've been using. Can we show it to the rest of the staff? Here's how I think it will help them. You may have an administrator who's willing to say, perfect, like run with it. You can plan the meeting and that would help me out in a lot of ways.
So one of the ideas that you have is called Fight Club. And
yes.
I laughed a lot when I saw that, because that brings back many memories of some professional development that I've had that probably is not the kind of fight club you're talking about.
That wasn't much of a club. That was
just a fight.
Yeah,
yeah, just the fight.
I've been teaching 18 years, so I've had some experience, but not actual fights, but lots and lots of arguments. So could you tell us a little bit about that fight club idea?
Sure. So that kind of came from an inspired early morning writing session one day. And the whole idea is that we as educators love to argue. And I don't know what it is about education that makes us want to argue with each other. But lots of times you will have people who are, coming down on the side of, either side of an argument. And it's really about giving teachers the opportunity to have some type of format that lets them discuss and argue without fighting about it, I guess, to really kind of come to a decision about that topic. And one of the ones that I mentioned in the book is homework, right? So I think there's a lot of teachers who might fall on either side of that argument, right? Either for homework or against homework. I think once you become a parent and you have some experience with your own children doing homework, you maybe develop different feelings about homework as a parent than as a teacher. So I think there's a lot that can go into that argument. But I think if you present that, the whole goal is that somebody is walking out of that fight club changing their mind or reconsidering, that's something I hadn't thought of walking into it today. But really just taking a hot topic in education and really having a meaningful discussion, debate, argument about it, and really just taking a different look or a different approach to that professional development.
I love that. And I love the title. I think that in itself would get some people in there.
Absolutely.
I liked some of your ideas, like the Tex-Mex Tuesday, mostly because it grabbed my attention with the Lego Movie reference. And my three boys and I just love that movie and quote it all the time. So incorporating the idea of, and Lunch and Learn was kind of, to me, it's kind of similar. But could you explain those? Those are to me very casual, informal. I guess if you have a testy group and you're getting started with this PD idea, with this sort of grassroots PD idea with other teachers, the Fight Club might not be the first step. You might start with some food.
Throw some food at them.
Could you describe those?
Yeah, you want to go a little bit softer first before Fight Club, I think. Right. And really for me, it was about changing that culture in the school district that I was talking about surrounding professional development. So there were a lot of people who were angry with having to sit through PD. And I kind of started with voluntary options. So our Tech-Mex Tuesday, our Lunch and Learns, were some options where teachers had the opportunity to come, but I wasn't forcing anyone to be there. And I think building small like that can help. The number one thing you can do in any professional development session is offer food. So whatever it is, food is going to bring people out. With Tech-Mex Tuesday, we would bring out, sometimes it was just chips. Sometimes we would bring out the quesadilla maker and make some quesadillas. But it really is a kind of fun, informal way to bring people out. And then once they're there is when you're trying to really help them learn, right? So bringing something else to them that will help them in that setting. Lunch and Learn, same thing. It's an informal. Teachers can do that on their own lunch. So, whether you're brown bagging it or ordering a pizza for everyone, it's relatively simple. You can share a tool in 20 minutes. And really just give everybody a chance to kind of use that tool during that time.
Another thing that stood out to me was the data dump. If I had a penny for every time I've heard the word data, I could probably purchase this millions of dollars school. But data has to be handled, right? We got to analyze data. We got to know what's going on. But I love the idea of the data dump. So talk about that for just a second.
Yeah. So I I would consider myself an expert on data and using spreadsheets. And a lot of times I would hear complaints from other administrators about how teachers are using data. And I think the unfortunate part of that is that as administrators, we rarely show teachers how to analyze data. So we will always talk to teachers about, yeah, you have to look at the data and you have to, data informed decision making. And it's such a buzzword that is used in so many inappropriate ways that I was looking for just something simple in terms of looking at data, understanding it, and then making a plan with it. So let's really get down to, here's the data. Let's ask some questions about it. So looking at this data, are there any kind of trends that we're looking at? Are there anything that we can kind of understand about our students to help us? But then really from there is taking that information and using it to help students. And I think, I have worked with administrators in the past who had these very gorgeous binders full of colored graphs and data. And I know in one such instance, I asked the administrator, like, that's amazing. Like, when do teachers get to look at that? And she said, well, this is my binder. I don't let the teachers look at this data. And it's such a missed opportunity in terms of data. So I think it is something where it does have to guide instruction. You can collect all the data in the world. It's not going to help anybody unless you bring it back and use it to make decisions about students.
So one of the things that I kind of think about whenever I'm in a PD session, I think about what makes me kind of uneasy or uncomfortable, and sometimes just the physical sitting and not getting up and moving around for long periods of time gets to be more of a distraction than anything else. As far as a couple of those things, movement of the faculty, if you have to have a group of people together. I know there are other ways, and you discuss those in your book, as well as time. Is there a magic period of time that you recommend? Like, is it 15 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Or does it just kind of vary depending on situations?
So I think it does vary depending on situations. I mean, I almost feel like everyone's, attention span is getting shorter and shorter. And I know we experienced that with students, certainly, where, you're moving in quick bursts, you're doing things, short time frames for students, trying to get them active, trying to get them moving. And I think in a lot of ways, doing the same for adults is important. Anytime I'm doing, a professional development session with teachers, I try to get them actively involved and up and moving right at the beginning of the session, because there is some research into the idea that if you do have them actively participating within the first 2 minutes of a session, they're more likely to be active throughout that session. One of the things that I love to do at the beginning of one of my own PDs is ultimate rock, paper, scissors. So we have the whole group getting up, doing rock, paper, scissors until we whittle down to one winner within the room. And it's just a fun thing to do. It kind of breaks the ice. If it's a room full of people who don't know each other, it gives them a chance to meet each other. And then just gets everybody excited for what's to come. And again, getting everybody up and active, hopefully is going to make them active throughout that session.
And still, I guess, along the same lines of time, could you give an example of maybe how a school can waste time in professional development as opposed to what a school can do to replace wasted time?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book on time, and that's probably the worst thing we do in terms of professional development is waste a lot of time. We have very few minutes in terms of professional development, which again is why I'm so impressed that you guys have PD on a daily basis. I know in certain districts, it does become a priority. In one of my former districts, we dedicated a lot of half days to PD for teachers. In the setting that I'm in now, for example, I have one monthly meeting with staff, and then we have one grade level meeting per month as well. So it's not a lot of minutes. One of the biggest time wasters is an administrator getting up there and reading from a list or a PowerPoint during a staff meeting. And I would say staff meetings are probably the biggest offender because it is, again, 60 minutes, let's say once a month, where you can utilize that time for professional learning. But lots of times it is policy and procedure, and here's a list of things that are happening this week, and this is coming up next week. A lot of things that can go in an email or a newsletter once a week. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of administrators who are out there sharing information in that way. And I think that probably is the number one time waster, that if we got away from that and actually use that time across the board for professional development and professional learning and really trusted educators to utilize that time on their own, we could probably have a huge impact as a whole on education.
Since I've taken control of my own learning, I mean, I have my professional development with the school and faculty as well, obviously, but I've done a lot since I've been introduced to Twitter for education, and getting into the Dave Burgess consulting books and doing the podcast, and just really kind of putting myself out there and looking up things that are interesting to me. I found that I have a lot more fun in my job. It's a lot more fun because I'm finding new ideas and then putting them into my classroom. So how can I get that across to other teachers? You mentioned, and we've interviewed Dave before, and he mentioned it as well, that whole backlash you get from other teachers, that negativity that's constantly coming at you. So how can you get past that and try to get other people excited as well?
So again, I think it kind of builds from the grassroots. And I think it's, I like to call your rogue friends. You have to find your rogue friends. And it's those educators who have similar beliefs, who are interested in pursuing their own learning. There's a part in the book where we talk about, one person who is promoting these crazy ideas for professional development is just that, they're crazy. Once you get two people who are promoting crazy ideas for professional development, that's a movement. And I think that's what it's all about, is it's getting, whoever your rogue friends are, even if it's one or two other people, to kind of start and push from there. Because other people will eventually see that you are, number one, having fun in what you're doing. And what I love to see is someone who's been an educator for multiple years, and maybe they're, on the tail end of their career, but all of a sudden their career is changed by connecting with somebody on Twitter, connecting with somebody on Voxer, reading Teach Like a Pirate or one of the other Dave Burgess books, and changes their trajectory as a teacher. And that can be an amazingly powerful thing. And I think once others kind of see that, they want to get involved. And I think, unfortunately, it takes a long time to do those sorts of things, right? Building culture surrounding professional development can be a very difficult thing. I think you do have to start small. I think if you offer those voluntary opportunities, give teachers the chance to see what's possible in terms of professional development. As you said before, a lot of people hear that term and they get turned off right away. But it is really showing them what's possible with relation to professional development.
Right. Maybe we need to give professional development a new title so that it sounds like more fun. More people will want to do it.
With the push of information that's out there, how is it that we still have a lag, or is there still a lag across the country? You see it. Where are we as a whole across our country in education in terms of improving the way that this works? Because, I mean, it just now feels like we're starting to get the hang of it here at our school. But a look around, the educational world around us, it feels like they're still very far behind. So what are you seeing in terms of trends? So
I think education, unfortunately, has always been a very isolated field. Historically, a lot of teachers have closed their doors, gone in their classrooms, worked with their students, and not necessarily shared or collaborated with colleagues. And there are a lot of people who have moved away from that, who are opening up via Twitter, via podcasts, via Vox, or sharing, even if it's just sharing with your colleagues within the building. But I think there are still a lot of people who are isolating themselves. And some of it is fear. Some people are scared to kind of connect and put themselves out there, for fear of maybe making a mistake, or, maybe fear of technology, not necessarily understanding how technology works or what it is. I think we're going to continue to move toward connection. And I think for most educators, whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through connecting via other social media, connecting with the people in your building, the EdCamp movement, which has been huge in terms of connecting educators. When you have 200 educators who are showing up on a Saturday on their own time to continue their own professional learning, I think the message is out there that it is important to us as educators that we continue to grow this craft and really improve so that we can improve learning outcomes for students. I think we do have a long way to go in terms of getting all educators to that point. But I think it is about really, again, continuing in that grassroots manner, one educator at a time, one conversation at a time, building one relationship at a time, and getting those people to move forward in their learning.
I can't believe that I didn't even think to bring up ed camps. So I'm going to confess something. I've never been to an ed camp. So sell me on this. Tell me about ed camps. Why should I go?
So I was just at an ed camp on Saturday. It's an amazing experience. I went to my first ed camp probably close to 4 or 5 years ago. And going to my first ed camp is really what changed my mindset about what professional development could be. So prior to attending that first ed camp, I was used to the traditional sit and get, traditional PD, everybody in a room. And it wasn't until I realized, like, hey, showing up at this ed camp, people have choice in where they're going. People are coming up with conversations on the fly. And most of it is about that. It's about that conversation about education. And, again, for 200 people to show up on a Saturday on their own, they're dedicated to what they're doing. They're dedicated to improving their craft. They're dedicated to continuing learning. And we talk all the time as educators about students being continuous learners and constantly learning. And I think it's important to model that for them. Don Wettrick, who hosts a podcast called Start Ed Up, he talks about not teaching the same year 20 years in a row. And that was advice he got from his dad, who said, I don't care if you teach for 20 years, but don't teach the same year 20 years in a row. And that's an important piece, right? We see new kids every year. Curriculum is constantly changing. Mindsets are constantly changing regarding instruction and learning. And I think it's important that we, continue to move forward with that. And I think the EdCamp movement has really given educators a voice in their own learning. It's not suddenly that one administrator or two administrators who are responsible for planning it. Now you're on your own, right? So you go out and you get what you need. And if you're in a session that is not working for you, the 2 feet rule says get up and go to something else. Find something that's going to be relevant to you. And that's a very powerful thing for educators. And I think that is something that, if it were just a fad, we would have seen a couple of ed camps and they would have died off quickly. But the power is in the choice. And, educators are still going to ed camps by the droves around the country and around the world because it is meaningful and relevant PD.
Well, I know we're kind of getting to where we're going to wind it down. I know in my classroom, I hate to say my favorite class, but they know they are. I have 5 classes I teach each day, and this one class knows that they are, and they've got themselves wrapped around my finger, because they really have the attitude of, we can control what we want to do in here, and they really want to learn. And as a result of that, we try all kinds of new things all the time because they ask for it and they come up with an idea. And they're the best class academically, in terms of motivation, and in so many different ways. They just are more fun to teach. And I think it's probably the same way with teachers. So could you kind of describe what motivated teachers, or what maybe unmotivated teachers, but what teachers need to do to be able to help transform PD as it may exist in a school, that maybe more mundane? What is it that teachers need to do rather than administrators?
So I think it is about taking charge of that professional learning. So, if you're forced as a teacher to sit through those meetings that are strictly informational, it's going out and finding something on your own. I know I had one former colleague who, the term rogue is from the book. It is a relevant, organized group of underground educators. And sometimes you do need to go rogue. You need to find that learning on your own when you're not getting it from whoever you're supposed to be getting it from. And sometimes it's not, malicious intent, right? There's no one who's planning PD as an administrator that sits there and says, I can't wait to bore these teachers to death. I cannot wait till they leave and they gain nothing from the session, right? Nobody is planning it that way. But for whatever number of reasons, whether it's mandated PD, whether it's a lack of time, whether it's the lack of planning or organization, sometimes it happens. And I think when that does happen as a teacher, you need to take responsibility for finding what you need on your own. So the one former colleague that I had, they were going through informational staff meetings. So they simply started a little weekly reading club. So they would share a blog post, and they would all read it, and then they would sit for 30 minutes and discuss it. We've seen book clubs at school where, you're taking a book and picking it apart, and, any of the Teach Like a Pirate, any of those books, Innovator's Mindset by George Couros, excellent books to kind of pick apart and find some things and apply them to your own learning. And I think, whether it's if you have 15 minutes in the car ride on the way home and you're listening to a podcast, such as Across the Hall, for example, making sure that you are continuing to learn. And I think whatever way you're doing that, podcasts, books, whether you're reading blog posts, whether you're checking out Twitter, is getting out there and getting connected. Even if it's connecting with the teacher down the hall and you're spending 15 minutes a day just talking about what worked or didn't work in your classroom. And I think if you can get out there and do that and not necessarily leave it up to that administrator who's also responsible for 200 other staff members, they're never going to be able to give you exactly what you need as a teacher. Despite good intentions and despite the time and effort that would go into it, it's nearly impossible to give everyone exactly what they need. So it is incumbent upon all educators to go out and find what you need on your own.
I absolutely agree. And it just makes it more fun that way. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. And so glad that you were finally able to be on Across the Hall.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's been a pleasure.
Like talking with your mouth full. At least you couldn't see that.
So this is more of a pop-up PD is one of his things.
I like.
We're going to do Fight Club, but that was going to get nasty, so we didn't.
Yeah, I like eating. Oh, we're on. So you guys, we were just talking about having professional development and eating over it, right?
Yeah.
And also talking about how in the world are we going to introduce this segment.
And so Cade surprised us there. But anyway, so as we were thinking about this particular episode and how to close this out and what we could offer, we thought, why not just have PD on PD? So we have invited a couple of our colleagues into the podcast room. We have Lauren Phifer, who's a first-year history teacher, and Mark Fuller, who has been around the block a time or two. He is an English teacher and teaches 12th grade English. So welcome to Across the Hall, Lauren and Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
In terms of PD and talking with Rich in that last segment, by the way, enjoyed that book. Make sure you go check that book out, 4 O'Clock Faculty. We learned a little bit about not only some of the methods to have unique and enjoyable professional development, but also learned a little bit about some of the content that might be presented in that professional development. And as we discuss professional development, we're probably going to bounce around and consider the subject at a few different angles. For example, I know in our group, we have some concerns about some of the whats. What are we going to do in our professional development? What should schools consider? Administrators, rather than just kind of strapping teachers into chairs and force feeding them certain things like Rich talked about, why does an English teacher need to learn about how to teach math? Or why does a math teacher have to learn specific standards related to science and never get to actually apply those things? We should have some interest in what we want in terms of our professional development. So that's going to be one key I think we're going to talk about. But also the second is going to be some of the process. What ideas do teachers have that could streamline the process or make it more enjoyable for teachers and not be something that's always so painstaking?
And in full disclosure, I have promised these people chips and guacamole for a Tex-Mex Tuesday and had a field trip and did not deliver. So if they're grumpy, that might be why.
So we're having podcast PD, even cooler.
Yeah, if I'm grumpy, it's because I'm looking for my guacamole and it's not around.
Sorry, Fuller.
And he's been around the block, whatever that means, right?
She didn't want to throw out a number, but it's around 20 years, okay? Just go ahead and throw that out while we're doing full.
You have a very mature voice for being 20 years old.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
So, Mark, just a few minutes ago, we were discussing off the air some of the ideas you have about some of the topics and that sort of thing that you would like to see more in professional development here at our school and just in general. First of all, you're an English teacher, so some of these things might be focused on that. But give us a little bit about some of the things that you think would be good.
Well, the biggest thing about English is reading and, of course, writing. But starting with reading, the sort of the magic happens when you get people reading and talking about reading and loving reading. And how do we make that magic happen? So there's a teacher who teaches near me who's done some really amazing things with inspiring her students to read. And I would love for her to give a PD on that. And it's all independent reading where she actually has her students who are seniors reading 10 books throughout the year independently, not even as a part of their assigned reading, and she's got them doing it. And so I think that if anybody hears about that happening, they want to know how. And she's got a great little system and has a lot of common sense to it. So that's one of the things. Just how do we inspire people to read and to love our subject?
I think that a lot of our colleagues, and no matter where you're teaching, a lot of our colleagues have some really awesome things going on, and we'd really love to see what they're doing and kind of be taught by each other. But what do you think might stop people from stepping up and doing that? I know for me, I would never have the confidence to think, oh, I'm doing something awesome. I think I want to go tell everybody about it. So how can we make that doable or make people want to go and offer up that kind of information, like Megan Boozer's who he's talking about. So, Boozer's never going to come out and say, hey, I'm doing this really awesome thing. How about we do a PD on this and I'll teach y'all what I'm doing? Because, I don't know. I guess we might think we're being conceited or something if we do that.
If we nominated each other.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, I like that. I think I read a book in college that was about getting kids to enjoy reading. And that goes perfectly with what Boozer's doing, because if they don't enjoy reading, then they're never going to learn how to read well. And so when you're constantly giving them assignments that they have to read, then it bogs it down and they're not enjoying it, so they're not going to do it well. So if she could teach us what the strategy she's using, if it's obviously working well, then that would be a good encouragement for us.
I love the idea of nominating each other, because, sometimes just in just normal conversation, we're talking about what we're doing in class, and if they're doing something really well. I know that Cade does something with his tracking his learning targets that I would really like to see a little bit more about that. And he would never step up and say, "Hey, I can teach y'all how to do this." But if someone were to nominate him, he'd feel a little more comfortable doing that. So that's a really good idea.
Plus the fact that a lot of school campuses, teachers don't necessarily know what's going on in each other's classrooms. And in Mark's instance, when he mentions Megan and he knows this about her classroom, that's largely because they both teach 12th grade English, where Michelle and I teach 9th and 10th. And it's also geographically suitable for him to know that, because they're in a separate building. And so we're across campus in a different building, and we aren't really inclined to know a lot of that information of what goes on over there. It's always a different world. So in terms of that, in the nomination process, it would sort of invite people to disclose information about some of their closest neighbors and the ones that they work with regularly that others of us don't.
Yeah, this podcast is called Across the Hall because last year Cade and I were across the hall from each other, but actually this year I'm across the hall from Lauren. And like I said, Lauren's a first-year teacher, and we spend a lot of time talking about reading and writing strategies, and she's been so good about asking how to bring those skills into her social studies classroom. And so I'm sure you've got some ideas as a first-year teacher of some things we could do for professional development.
Well, one thing that I would love to do, I've benefited with I have a camera in my classroom, so I can video what I'm doing in my class. I can watch it. I think one of the main purposes for us was for us to be able to reflect on our lesson that we gave. So even as nerve-wracking as that sounds, having like a popcorn party or something where people can come in and view your lesson and critique it. And I even joked that the only thing I could think of calling it was popcorn persecution, because it sounds very daunting. But it would be good to me, especially if I had this really amazing lesson I planned and it just went awful, and people could come in and tell me, well, this is why. You didn't have X, Y, or Z, or you didn't, your grouping was all wrong, whatever it might be. You could have somebody in there helping you, veteran teachers especially helping you, or even new teachers who have used some of those same strategies, but they just weren't implemented right.
I like that, because, even as veteran teachers, we could learn from you coming straight out of college and having all these new and fresh ideas. So while we can help with some of the things that you're missing, you're also offering us some ideas that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Right. So that's a really good idea. One of the things I always think about when I think about professional development is the vertical teaming. I really like talking across the grade levels and finding out about expectations, especially from school to school. I teach 9th grade, and for years I taught 8th grade, and we were the only grade in the school. And so I would have to talk to the 9th grade teachers a lot and try to figure out what exactly I was preparing my students for. But I built that relationship over years. So the first several years that I worked there, I didn't have that relationship, and I had no idea what they were going into. And so I think it's just really important to kind of sit down. And I think if teachers had that time to do that a little more informally, without someone saying, we're going to talk about this specific thing, and really talk about, what are the strengths and weaknesses we're seeing in our students? What are you doing with them that maybe I could build on if I knew that you were doing it? Or what could you prepare them for that I'm doing that you just don't know that I'm doing? So I think that those conversations could be pretty effective as well, as far as the kids going from one grade level to the other.
As you guys are discussing this, I kind of think about the nature of our classrooms. In every instance where we're trying to develop ourselves, we can also consider our students and their desire or lack of desire to develop themselves. And we all would agree that as teachers, the best classroom environment is where students want to learn. And when students want to learn, like Mark was talking about, the reading of 10 books, if that becomes, what's my next book? I'm going to choose my next book. I went to the library yesterday, or I was researching online some literature that fits a genre that I'm interested in, or whatever. That would thrill us. The idea that teachers, the idea that students desire and possibly even craft the course of their own learning is what the modern craze of design thinking is all about. It's getting students to kind of pave their own way to not only desire but actually outcome of the learning process. So right now, what percentage would you guys say across the board in different school systems, what percent of professional development is determined by teachers themselves, and what percent is determined by administration?
Very little is determined by teachers themselves. Sometimes we have choice PD, which is nice to be able to choose which thing that you're going to. Even in that process, most of those options don't come from the teachers themselves, as far as I know. But I mean, that's nice. It's nice to have a choice and not all have to go into the same thing. And that's with not just where we are, but where I've taught before as well. So choice is nice. It is nice to have that chance to kind of say, this is what I want to learn, and somebody listen to that.
Yeah, and probably the reluctance to let teachers choose their PD is sort of like a teacher's reluctance in letting students direct their learning. You're not quite sure they're actually going to be directing it in the right way or directing it like you want to. It's just the fear of releasing control. We can see that as an analogy, and our reluctance to do that. And I know I have trouble with that in my classroom. So I can kind of see where that comes from. But so we could maybe think about ways to make, proposals that would be legitimate and accepted by maybe the administration, if that would be possible. I mean, we're a lot of times there is an agenda. We're trying to raise test scores, and that's where the pressure is coming from, and that's what drives our PD right now is data-driven instruction and all that kind of thing. And while that is helpful, it's we would like to, diversify that a little bit.
Rich said in his in the interview that no principal or administrator goes into planning PD thinking, how can I make these people as miserable as possible? So it's not like we're throwing out ideas at them and they're knocking them down. It's just not something that we're not used to having to give ideas or offering up ideas for professional development. We're usually just on the receiving end and not thinking about it. So I know administrators are trying to plan something that is meaningful across the board. In whatever school that you're in, they're not trying to make us miserable or offer us something that's not worthwhile. It's just, I think the subtitle is Teachers Gone Rogue, Professional Development Gone Rogue. So it's us taking the reins a little bit and doing this on our own.
Yeah, I think if you, when you had those choice PDs, if you could even nominate, like you said, those people who are doing something really awesome that's working out really well, and you nominated those people. Because, if I know I'm doing something really awesome in my class, I may not want to be like, hey, you got to see what I'm doing, So if you were nominated to do that, might be a better way to implement it.
So I know we've talked a little bit about the Choice PD offered at our school system. That Choice PD is something that started a couple years ago, and it's kind of evolved from something that was first directed largely by our administration because it really needed to be. We needed to be guided before we could sort of take the reins of it. But the last time we've had the Choice PD, we received an email with a Google spreadsheet that basically said, or a Google form, what if you were interested in presenting on a topic that you believe you're kind of an expert in or you're well practiced in, record what that subject is or that topic is, whether it's content or an instructional strategy or using technology or some technological tool, and we could volunteer ourselves. So that is part of the evolution of our school system and how we're coming more and more of a teacher-driven faculty, that is professional development faculty. And so that's something that's pretty exciting for us.
Right. So that would that whole idea of volunteering somebody else. So there may have been several people who had lots to offer and just didn't volunteer themselves because they didn't think what they had to offer was worthwhile. Fuller, I'm a little distracted. Is that a flip phone that I see sitting there in front of you?
You got that right.
So
all you need, it's a phone. It's not a computer. It's not a whatever else it is. Not a map. It's not a stereo. It's a phone.
I haven't seen one of those.
I don't watch movies on this. I talk on it. It's a phone.
I haven't seen one of those in maybe 15 years. But anyway, so how is technology in your classroom if that's your phone?
It's kind of basic, you might guess, and that's true. But technology is a reality that even I deal with, and I have taken advantage of. I've used some online resources recently that have been, on the one hand, very helpful because they've been really worked on and developed by teachers, and it's starting to get very powerful. On the other hand, we get kicked off the website a lot, and there's always technical issues. So that's just a kind of a constant thing that you have to live with, and it's a character-building thing for me. But one of the most useful PDs we had leading into this semester was a man from Apple Computer who said, I'm going to teach you 10 things that you may not know that you can do with your MacBook. And everybody found that useful, from the experienced to the inexperienced teachers. And so I think that kind of thing, and I found it useful too. So specific, practical applications on technology, I think that are kind of short and sweet would be helpful, and then with some follow-up, like maybe some printed out instructions that you could keep to look at when you needed to, those of us who still like printed out instructions. So yeah, technology and blending technology. I mean, there's a huge debate about the ultimate effects on cognition of learning through digital media. And so that's going on all the time, but it's also a reality. We're trying to prepare students not only for enjoying reading and all that, but also for the skills they're going to need in the job market. So that blend of instruction, we've been talking, that word blend has been around a while. It's coming from everywhere, the administration as well. How do we do that? And it's going to look differently in our classrooms, but it is a reality that we all can work with and help each other with.
So for those of you who are still hanging on to the flip phones, you might need a little pop-up PD to teach you about some of the new technology things coming around the bend, right?
That's right.
Okay. One of the things that I thought about that would be good to get us out of the school would be like a walk and talk. One of the dangers of that I would not want it to be a gripe session, but just a time to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. I know a big push in education right now is being innovative, and trying to do that myself, it's been hard to figure out a way to really balance that with the curriculum and the preparing them for standardized tests and all that, and be able to talk to them about being more creative and pull all that together and learn how to do that. So it would be nice to be able to have a time to just really talk that out with somebody, and getting outside and going for a walk, getting a little exercise, and just having those positive, constructive conversations. Teachers sometimes, whenever they get together, tend to want to rant, and we all need to vent every now and then, but to just really have time, maybe once a week, once every other week, to just kind of talk through some of the problems that we're going through and trying to really be more innovative in our classrooms. Any ideas about that?
Well, I don't know. Teachers, on the one hand, they're isolated in their own little cubicles and teaching, and then we come out of our little cubicles and we want to talk with each other, and so there's sort of the nature of the beast type thing, and that we have to adjust to. I think in any profession, in any company, they work to try to build up team building activities and sharing of ideas and all that, because creativity is a great asset in any organization. So we just have to figure out how to do that here. I have a little, I once went to an AP meeting, or a PD led by an AP teacher who was an old experienced teacher, or a very experienced teacher, and he mentioned the ability to weave together all the strands of your content and your skills and everything else that you want to weave together into your classroom, your great wisdom that you want to impart, and all that is sort of like playing it like jazz. And it takes a long time to make it look easy. And it looks easy, when you see somebody great doing it. But just the ability to break that down and make it possible for the rest of us to do, it would be nice to talk about that.
Yeah, I like that. Play it like jazz. That's a snazzy title for a pop-up PD.
I don't have any snazzy titles like Mark over here, but I would love to I know when we have our morning meetings, I feel a lot of pressure to get a lot of work done in a very short amount of time. And a lot of the times it takes me a good 20 minutes or so just to get my mind to focus and quit being distracted. So even if just meeting at a coffee house after school, even with the instructional partners, I know we have an instructional partner for the history department here who's phenomenal, and I love meeting with her. She's very encouraging, very helpful, very kind, and if I could just sit at a coffee house with her next to me while I plan a unit, and then she tells me, no, stop, do this instead, or here's an activity, then that would be really helpful. And or just even meeting with people and discussing different activities. I know now we're all about active learning and student engagement, getting kids up and moving, and I lack for all of those different strategies. So even creating like a live Google Doc that people could put activities on. And when I look online or I'm given activities to use, normally they are in the form of a 200-page document that I should read and go through. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to open that. If you give me a 200-page document, I'm not going to open it because that's overwhelming. But if I can see a Google Doc and people have summarized a few things on, I'm going to look through and try to find something that might work in my room.
All right, so I'm going to spin off of Mark's idea with Play It Like Jazz, and I'd come up with a few different ideas where really I'd like starting with a title and then figuring out the idea. Probably it should work the other way around, like the idea and then the title. But so here it goes.
That's backwards design.
Maybe.
Starting with the end in game.
Okay.
The end in game.
End in mind.
That's
Thank
what
you.
happens when you doodle and you talk.
Look, we'll go with that, Lauren. That sounds good. So I call this one drive-through PD because
McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, what do I get? Arby's.
Wouldn't that be nice? As long as it could come with a side of that barbecue sauce or some kind of a throwback sauce. Throwback.
An activity
Chick-fil-A
on
sauce.
the side.
Yeah, something fun on the side.
We're distracted. I'm hungry. Go ahead.
All right, so drive-through PD, it might be like some challenge that one teacher would like to offer another teacher. So it kind of is cognitively good for that teacher because even that teacher who issues the challenge wants to give some kind of really good, juicy challenge. And so you could swing by and drop a Post-it note off on the door or on the teacher's desk or a podium and give that teacher a challenge to use some strategy or tool that teacher is not accustomed to using. It shouldn't be something that's just a zinger, but
so I can't just say leave a random word and say you have to use this word sometime in class in a meaningful way. And
maybe I guess you could
leave you the word like toilet and say, hey, work that in.
I guess so. Maybe. Now that gets back to like pirate pedagogy, doesn't it? So it's just making it fun. Why in the world did he just use a toilet? But, that idea, and then maybe the teacher who has rose to the occasion and completed the challenge can then return it in sticky note form or some form in drive-through back, which Lauren was just saying a few minutes ago. It's different than drive-by, but, in a much more positive light, of course, saying, hey, look what I've accomplished, and I did what you asked me to do.
More like a giving plate.
A giving what?
A giving plate.
A giving plate?
A giving plate. You have to put something on the plate. You give the plate, it has a nice little saying on it, and then you have to pass that plate on to someone else.
Okay.
Somebody new, not the person who gave it to you in the first place.
Oh, that's pretty good. I don't know what that is, but it makes sense. I was also
giving lesson, that's what we should call it.
You made me think of a give and go in basketball, like pass it off and then getting the ball back. So it also relates to.
It can work either way, however you want it to work.
I also came up with one I titled Secret Santa PD, and then I had to come up with what in the world I meant by that. So Secret Santa or Dirty Santa, you could go to the Dollar Tree and just get some random object and drop that off at a teacher's desk and use a note there that says to use that in some design thinking way get that teacher to constructively use that object purchased from the Dollar Tree in their class instruction.
Students are pretty good at that. My student found a roll of toilet paper in my classroom and rolled my Christmas tree with it. So do you think teachers? Yeah, we could do that. We're up for that challenge.
So that, and it would probably be a situation where not only does the teacher know that he or she is trying to design some instructional thing around that, but also the students would see this teacher doing something that seems odd or foreign to them, and maybe get their interest as well kind of piqued with that. Our principal had an idea at the beginning of the school year to start video professional development, and this would be teacher-led. He gave us a voluntary opportunity, said anybody who is kind of tech-savvy who could use a QuickTime screen capture tool to capture any tutorials about how to use a certain tech tool or how to access or to accomplish something in Blackboard, our learning management system. Maybe it's adding assignments. Maybe it's grading assignments using the Grade Center. Maybe it's embedding Kaltura Media videos. Anything like that where other teachers who aren't familiar with those tools could learn in a matter of a 2 or 10-minute video from other teachers. And so he created what he called the 2-minute drill or the 10-minute clinic, depending on how much instruction needed to take place in that tutorial. 2 or 10 minutes worth is why he has those two different links. But
even with that, I think that whole nominating idea is good, because Mr. Harmon's the one who asked me to do the flip grid when I wouldn't have done that on my own, because I wouldn't have thought that anything that I had to offer anybody else would want. And he asked me to do that. So if we were to nominate each other, that might get that going a little bit better.
Yeah, and Mr. Harmon, our principal, Heath Harmon, he did one on Twitter and using Twitter for educational purposes, I believe. And on that note, talk about like professional development and getting students engaged as well. On all of these sorts of things, tech tools and that sort of deal, we could have students create such videos for teachers to use, and that would be kind of fun, not just for the teacher to learn from students, but also it would be accomplishing what we are trying to accomplish and getting students to be leaders and groundbreakers and that kind of thing. So students could generate some videos on how to use certain websites or certain social media platforms for educational purposes, that kind of thing.
Along those lines, I've actually really I've begged a couple students to please teach me how to use Photoshop. I like to take pictures on the side, and my editing, I just can't quite figure out Photoshop as much as I would like to, and I know that we've got some students that are really good at it. They take graphic arts, so that would actually be a pretty cool PD to have a student lead that, even for 15 minutes or so after school one day, and would kill two birds with one stone. We're all gathering together to learn something we want to learn, and we have a student teaching us instead of them, us teaching them. So that'd be kind of cool.
So Mark, you presented to us some thoughts about how teacher professional development does not have to be so organized and structured, that kind of thing. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, a lot of it occurs naturally. It occurs after school, in between classes, at lunch, and those, when I have a problem as a teacher, I do go and find teachers that I know could help me with that problem. That's happened to me several times this week. So those things are natural. Those things happen a lot, and I don't know whether we can capture that in any way, but that is part of what I guess professional development is. So I think we need to recognize that and maybe look at that and see how that happens, encourage it happening. I know we've talked about teams and the fact that, for example, I'm teaching next to teachers that are teaching my same students, my same grade level, my same subject. That lends itself to a lot of collaboration, and we work together a lot just because of that. And I think that's part of the design of the way our building is structured. So that's one of the things I think that could foster that natural PD, is thinking about putting teams of teachers together, teachers that teach and have a lot of same subjects or same students to talk about.
So if I wanted to have a pop-up PD, a Tex-Mex Tuesday, a Fight Club, whatever, what would it take for you to stay after school or to come early or to whatever, to come to my PD that I've, as a teacher, decided I'm going to go rogue, I'm going to plan my own?
Yeah, Mark. What would it take for you to stay after school?
Well, I do stay after school and do a lot of...
How long, Mark?
I do a lot of grading and things like that while I'm after school.
Until 6 o'clock. He stays really, really late. His little blue car is always in the parking lot.
I do some thinking as well. But anyway...
And I've done thinking with him. He is fun to... His brain is fun to pick.
It's fun to talk to. Yeah, that's right. And that's
how
I...
fun to talk to.
I get it. Like, if somebody will walk in and sit down and talk to me about all kinds of philosophical things, then that's right. I will sit and talk for a while about that.
So what you're telling me is that if I want to have some PD about design thinking, I'm just going to have to come over to your room and pretend like it's philosophical and work my way in and trick you?
That's right. And see, that's not very efficient because you're having to do all that just for one person. So in order to get people to come to a PD, which is what we're talking about, I mean, that is a struggle because everybody's got their free time after school is booked up in a lot of ways. And I'm not exactly sure how to do that. I think one of the things is to make it 15 minutes. Another thing is to have it be something that people are going to want or need. And then maybe make it local. You know, we have a big campus and having to walk a long way to another class across the campus is probably not going to be very practical. And then finally, the reason I'm in this podcast is because you pestered and bugged me and flattered me into being here. So that's another way you can do it is pester, bug, and flatter people to come to your PD.
I like that. That should be a slogan.
Thanks, Mark. You're the best.
The pester, buggins, and what? Flatter. Pester, buggin, flatter, PD.
That's right.
Yeah, if you did it after school and it was just short and you came to my room, that would be very appealing. So I have to leave and go get my kids, and I don't like to leave them at daycare too long, and I commute to work. So something quick after school would be very appealing.
So like house calls, classroom calls. So
Yeah.
I
thought you meant I was supposed to go like knock on people's
No, but
doors.
I told you that was inefficient for you to have to go to a specific teacher's room to give a PD. But on the other hand, it's like making a house call, and maybe somebody that's next to Phifer would come over, you know, and if you wanted to talk to, then that would be like a small group. You could bring the PD to the people.
Mm-hmm. So like kind of like a follow the leader. I can go get Lauren and say, okay, follow me, and then I pick up Cade on the way by, and then I pick up somebody else, and then we end up in your room.
And only 15 minutes. She can't
get all the way to where you are.
Right. So the idea is that you would come to the teacher that only has 15 minutes. That way, you cut in on her time. You cut out her travel time.
So yesterday, I got a phone call. Our church, as I told you guys earlier, our church was impacted by a recent tornado. And so for a couple weeks, we're not meeting together. We're having to meet in other buildings and until our building is fixed. And yesterday, I got a call from the phone tree, which we don't typically do phone trees. We have social media. We got other stuff. And you just made me think of a phone tree where one person contacts another who contacts another. And through the course of a day, we could do some kind of PD tree where one person communicates a message to one teacher, and then we kind of just keep passing it along.
You could even do you do the high of your day and the low of your day. Just like maybe on a Wednesday when, you're trying to get over the hump of the week, meet together and be like, okay, what was your low today? Everybody have like a 5-minute gripe about something they tried and didn't go well or something that was bothering them. And then you have your high of the day. And that could be a really awesome activity you discovered and be sharing that with your colleagues.
I like that. I think the bottom line of any PD that teachers need to throw together is just to be positive, to give everything a positive spin. We have things that are going wrong, things that aren't working, things that are frustrating us, and we need to talk to each other about that. But the purpose of talking about that is to work through it and to try to do better next time. And fix what went wrong so that hopefully it won't go wrong the next day. And then just be positive and be constructive and build each other up is they're all staring at me.
Don't feel awkward. This isn't awkward.
I feel awkward. I'm usually just have Cade staring at me. I've got 3 people staring at me. So yeah, I think that as long as everybody is positive and it's not a gripe session, it's how can we learn from this and do better, and how can we learn from each other that anything that we try is positive, right?
Yeah, my legs right now are telling me, since we're putting into this practice right now, this podcast is being recorded by all of us standing up. And we've reached the brink of where our legs are tired. We have to close. Mark has to go to his classroom for the next 4 more hours. He's got and I believe Lauren dropped a hint about her kids being stranded at daycare still right now.
They're staring at the clock, wondering where Mom is.
Yeah. So we hope that some of the ideas that we've shared with you in our little roundtable discussion have been useful. We also have tried to model for you what a pop-up PD session could look like, where just a group of us are around, and it would have been annoying with like munching sounds and food in our mouths, but I thought about bringing a bag of chips and it really didn't happen. Mostly I asked Michelle to do it because I was too cheap, and she didn't, so I blame all the blames on her.
I didn't. It was my bad. Oh, thank you, Lauren and Fuller, so much for joining us, for using all your time. Lauren, that you could be picking up your kids. Fuller, that you could be taking a nap in your classroom. I appreciate y'all coming in here and being on our show today.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This was fun.
Thanks a lot for keeping me awake.
Now get that flip phone and take it on back to your room. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Rich Czyz for sharing all about how to go rogue with professional learning. Don't forget to stop by acrossthehallpodcast.com for the show notes, and join the Across the Hall conversation on Twitter at #XTheHall. We hope you'll join us next time.